I'm Sari Mitnick, and this is Seamwork Radio, where we tell stories about the surprising ways that sewing impacts our lives. Hi, everybody, and welcome to the very first mini episode of Seamwork Radio. We're going to be talking to makers like you in these little mini episodes about how the practice of sewing has helped them to slow down, get to know their bodies, discover who they are, and connect to the people around them. So you'll be able to tune in here every month for these little mini episodes, kind of mid-month, and we'll share stories from our community of people who care about sewing and creating just like you do. So I'm Sari, and I'm the founder of Seamwork.
And I'm Haley. I'm the pattern designer here at Seamwork, and I'm excited to be hosting along here with Sari.
So every month, what we're going to do is just share stories around our theme for the month. So our theme for this month is creative grit. So what is this idea of creative grit? You might be familiar with the idea of grit being our tolerance to failure. And creative grit is just the tolerance that we have for failure when we're specifically engaged in these creative pursuits. So it really comes from this ability to be gentle with yourself and at the same time optimistic about the future. And that really helps you push through all kinds of creative challenges. So for example, when you are maybe sewing and you have to rip out your zipper 5 times in a row, it can be so easy to just kind of spiral on that and to think of that as a failure and a reflection of your abilities rather than an opportunity to learn and to grow. So that kind of optimism is just something that you have to practice, just like putting in a zipper is something you have to practice. And that's what kind of sustains your creativity over the long haul. So this theme was inspired by an article I wrote a while back called How to Develop Creative Grit. And if you want to read that, it's in issue 45 of Seamwork. And I share some tips for developing this kind of practice when you sew. And we'll put a link to that in the show notes as well. So you can check that out if you want. But today, we really wanted to share some of your stories.
So that kind of leads us into our question of the month. Each month, we're going to reach out to you, our community of amazing sewers, and ask you a question. And you guys can submit your answers directly to us, and we will play them here. So this month, we wanted to know about a time that you almost gave up on a creative project, but you didn't. Sari, is there a time that you really wanted to call it quits?
There have been many times I wanted to call it quits. I think almost every creative project has that moment in it when you're just like, I am done. But I think like the most dramatic time for me, the one that really comes to mind is when I wrote my sewing book, which was many years ago now. It's kind of hard to believe how long ago it was. Probably, 8 years ago maybe. But in that instance, I was running this little fledgling company. I had only one other person working with me. I was doing that and then also trying to write this book, which is something I had never done before. I was working 7 days a week. I just decided to kind of split my time and work 3 days a week on the book and 4 days a week on the business. And I just took no breaks. And I just almost had a nervous breakdown. It was a wonderful experience to write the book. It was super creatively fulfilling and a really, really interesting time. But yeah, I really learned what my boundaries were through that experience, and that you can't really just push yourself, or at least for me, I can't. I'm sure some people can't. I can't push myself to that level and still maintain a high level of creativity and a high level of emotional well-being and all the stuff that goes along with that. What about you, Haley? Do you have any times that stick out to you?
Oh man, I agree. I feel like most creative projects have that like make it or break it moment. The time that's standing out to me is kind of recently. So I recently had my baby girl, and after I had her, I took like a little sewing hiatus naturally. And like a month or so after she was born, I was like, okay, I gotta like sew something. I gotta get back into it. So in this totally like sleep deprived state, I like packed her up. I drove to the fabric store and was like, I'm gonna make this like really involved quilt that I've been eyeing. I'm like not a quilter, but I was like totally stuck on this idea. So I bought all of the things to make this quilt, and I like sat it on my supplies on my dining room table, and I would just stare at it every time I walked by it. I'm like, oh my God, I can't do it. Sometimes I'd break open the instructions and look at the cutting instructions, and it would just boggle my poor little sleep deprived mind. And finally, I just felt like, you know what? Like, I'm not being gentle with myself. This is just not where I'm at right now with sewing. So I decided to pivot. I'm still going to make a quilt, but I'm going to choose something a lot simpler that actually feels feasible at this moment in my life. So I pivoted. I made the quilt. It took me like all of these little itty bitty nuggets of sewing time, but I finally did it. And it's hanging up in my living room now. And every time I look at it, it reminds me of that like really precious time in my life, but also that like I can do things and I can do hard things.
Mhm.
Um, and just being gentle with myself and meeting myself where I'm at in that moment, which I love that about the idea of creative grit, that it's not about being hardened. It's oftentimes about being gentle and soft with yourself.
Yeah, it's this idea of self-compassion. And I think you bring
Mhm.
up a really good point of matching the projects you're doing to where your life is at the moment and really having a lot of self-awareness around that.
Totally. Like, I was not about to do some paper piecing in that moment. Like, it was just not going to happen.
Yeah, there's also something about quilts. I have so many half-finished quilts in boxes that it's just so overwhelming.
Yeah, I admire it. People who make quilts as their bread and butter, that's a gift.
Yeah, it's different. It's a different skill set for sure.
All right. So now we're going to turn to our seam workers and hear about their stories. First up, we have a story from Marjorie.
Talk about wanting to abandon a project. I was making a dress for my son's wedding. This was for me as the mother of the groom. And I was getting real creative. I had really pretty fabric, and a nice, unusual pattern. Well, I managed to get almost to the end of it, and I felt like I was in a hurry. So what I did was I accidentally, since I had two irons going at the same time, a tiny one for the seams and one for the other end, with two irons going at one time, you can probably imagine what I did. I ended up with a melted piece right smack in the front shoulder. And of course, the wedding was right around the corner. At that point, I was ready to throw the whole thing into the trash and go out and just buy a dress somewhere, whatever I could find at that point. Instead, after shedding tears, etc., and actually leaving it in the trash basket for a day, I hauled it back out and I embroidered a feather in sort of, metallic threads and pretty colors. Anyway, metallic feather on a little tab. So it became a design element. And I stitched the tab into the shoulder seam so that it hung over the top left shoulder. So I had a lovely design element of a beautiful embroidered feather right there on the shoulder. But boy, I'm going to tell you, that project did stay in the trash for a day.
Oh my God, I love that story. I love how she describes the project sitting in the trash can, because that, I don't know, that just really says something about the level of, probably, I'm guessing, some anger that she felt. Because I could just feel that frustration and that anger. And I feel like a lot of times it's anger that's directed at the object, but it's really about yourself. It's really, you're kind of angry with yourself for what you did, for the mistake you made. And it seems like, to me, a big part of pushing through and keeping on track and continuing a project like that is just letting go of that anger with yourself. So I think it's just so symbolic that she put it in the trash and then spent some time, let it go, took it out of the trash, and then she had a creative way to fix it.
I'm proud of her. I don't think there's a time that I've put something in the trash, a project, and then it's made it back out. So that's a big deal.
I don't think I've ever done that either. Once it's in the trash, it's out of my life.
Yeah, I'm done with you. Good job, Marjorie. So next up, we have a story from Tiffanie in Birmingham, Alabama.
I remember being in undergrad at the University of Alabama, and I was working on a project for Tea Time. And Tea Time is actually a fashion show that we do every year, and we invite our friends and family to come see our work and take a look at our work. And I was making this knit beach wear dress, and it had so many ruffles at the top, and it folded over, and it was so hard to sew. And I really just wanted to just pretty much throw the whole dress out of the window, but I couldn't because it was 4th grade. And I was just so disheartened by this dress because I wanted to make it work and I couldn't figure out the sewing technique, and I needed all this extra help with it. And my teacher sat down with me and said, "Tiffanie, it's going to be okay." And I was so happy when I completed the dress and it looked exactly the way I wanted it to. And I'm so glad I stuck with it and that the dress turned out to be a success. So I would always tell anyone, when you get ready to quit a project, just take you a break and then come back to it and work on it little by little and little by little, and it will all work out and come together.
I love Tiffany's story. I can super relate to it. I also went to a design program, and those moments, especially when you're doing something that's not just for your personal enjoyment, but to be showcased to people, the pressure is so great. And I think that she really shows that you have to have some grace for yourself and take those breaks and maybe reevaluate how you're working on things. You don't need to work on your projects in these big, long chunks. You can just revisit things in little 20-minute sections and walk away, take some deep breaths. I have this personal rule that if I have to use a seam ripper more than twice in a row, like, it's time to take a break. You got to take a lap and like cool down. But
That's a great rule.
yeah, no, it's like this self-imposed rule that I've had for lots of years. But if you like Tiffany's story, you can go ahead and check her out on Instagram. You can find her at Sherry_Amore24. And next up, we have a story from Munirah. She's in New Jersey.
So I actually just worked on sewing my first bra and underwear set, and it was my first time working with lingerie, I guess, findings and notions. And I got a little bit creative trying to use one bralette kit to make both a bralette and a pair of underwear, and had issues with my bra fitting properly. It was a bit frustrating. I've been working on it for about a week, and once I kind of finished, even though it didn't fit, I was pretty much ready to give up and move on to the next sewing project. But I just kept looking at it on my table. It was driving me crazy. And in the middle of the night, I had this realization that I probably needed to change the elastic that I had used on the sides of the bralette cup, and maybe also try a different band. And so in doing this and making these really small changes, I was actually able to make a successful bralette, and it fits and is wearable now, which is really awesome. And I feel like it was so worth taking the time away from the project for a little bit. And then, sometimes in the middle of the night, you just get one of these moments, these aha moments. And I'm really happy that I stuck with it.
That was Munirah, and you can find her on Instagram at making_moon. I love how she describes that aha moment when she took a break, because I feel like that happens to me all the time. I mean, with sewing and creative projects, but also just with almost everything. I feel like, especially for me, it happens in the shower when
I was just going to say that.
I think that's probably true for a lot of people, because you're so relaxed and you're just not really thinking about anything. And I don't know. For me, it's always in the shower. I have great ideas. So I really like that. I think I've read that when you're stressed out, your focus really narrows. And so you're not able to see all of the creative possibilities because your brain is so focused on whatever this problem is that you're stressed about. So I think, it's hard to remember in the moment, but when you just are able to step away, all of a sudden you're not so focused on this one little thing, and you can see so many different ideas, and you can start making those connections. Your brain can start making those connections when you're not even really thinking about it.
Yeah, it's like literally zooming out to see the big picture.
Yeah.
The next story we have is from Marissa Fernandez. She is a creative knitter and sewer and a maker advocate. Marissa shares her maker affirmations on her Instagram and Patreon account. You can follow her on Instagram at Marissa Made. She's also one of the amazing writers that we're featuring in the August 2020 issue of Seamwork. Her article is called Failure is the Birthplace of Creativity. I love that. So true, as we're finding today. And she challenges you not to see your failures as obstacles, but as kind of an exercise in resilience and tenacity and perseverance. So definitely go check that out. Here is Marissa's story.
Hey y'all, this is Marissa from Marissa Made. I want to tell y'all about the sweater with no sleeves. For those of you that don't know, I am a sewist and a knitter, and so I had this knitting project that I needed to finish in time for an event. But I could not, for the life of me, get the increases right. I did the increases wrong on this sweater. Not once, not twice, but 3 times. For sewists, for perspective, that's like me cutting out the wrong size in my fabric 3 times. I know, painful. So, fast forward, we're the night before the event. I have finally gotten through the increases on my sweater, but I'm still trying to knit the sleeves. And I'm knitting furiously and angrily, and I'm frustrated. And I just said, you know what? I'm not doing this. And I just dropped my needles right then and there. I woke up the next morning. I put that sweater on with half of a sleeve, just one. And I threw a jacket over top and walked into that event just like that. And then this amazing thing happened at the event, right? Because makers see makers no matter what, right? So I walked in there and I got tons of kind compliments, tons of kind questions, lots of thoughtful remarks. I mean, it was just amazing. And it kind of melted away all my angst about this project. So, event finishes, I go home, I'm looking at this sweater sitting on my bed with its half-done sleeve staring me in the face. And I said, you know what? I don't need that sleeve. And right then and there, I tore the sleeve out. I threw some ribbing on both sleeve caps, and I have never looked back. It's now my most worn knitwear item. I think it's probably the one I get the most compliments on and the most questions about. And it's the one that I feel like fits the most seamlessly into my wardrobe. So I have to be thankful for makers kind of rerouting my mindset and making me see the value in what I had initially picked, right? All right, that's it. That's my tale of the sweater with no sleeves. Thanks, guys.
So if you want to hear more from Marissa, you can follow her Instagram at Marissa Made, and you can also sign up for her Patreon for affirmations and discussions about the creative process. I think what I love most about Marissa's story is that she was able to reframe her missteps by pivoting and choosing a new direction, sewing, knitting, anything creative. I think it's about like forging our own paths, and even in the face of mistakes and hiccups. And I love that. I love that we can break the rules with what we wear, with how we accomplish things. And her story is kind of a testament to that, and that changing course isn't like a failure. It's just evidence that you persevered even when things weren't going as you expected them to.
Yeah, and maybe it comes out completely different than how you anticipated, but that doesn't make it any less yours. Yeah, my big takeaway from all of these stories is that all of these like big problems or mistakes that you encounter can be really stressful. And when it's stressful, that causes you to get upset and then sort of angry at yourself. And that creates more stress. And it's like this cycle. that can really be detrimental and just cause you to give up, or even maybe give up on the craft itself for periods of time. I know that people encounter that too. And I think, when you're stressed, you just have a harder time figuring a way out of it, out of the stress and out of whatever the problem is. So I think all these stories really showed how important it is to break that stress cycle. And I really like the idea you had, Haley, about, your rule about the seam ripper. If you have to seam rip more than twice, then you're done for the day. Like, I think just putting in place those little rules for yourself when you're not thinking clearly because you're stressed out is so helpful. And that's something I'm definitely going to do from now on.
Yeah, definitely. Don't you think it's so funny listening to all of these clips? I noticed that everybody has like a smile in their voice or even laughs a little bit when they're telling these stories.
Yeah.
And looking back in those moments, you're so frustrated. You throw your project in the trash, you want to give up on it, but then you push through and then you look back and you are able to laugh about it. And that's just like I think a resilience and levity that we build through our creativity. That's really powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. I was just thinking that's life. That's like a good way to approach life. And it's something that a creative practice can really teach you.
Yeah, 100%.
Well, thank you guys for all of your stories. Next month, we're going to be talking about connection. So we'd love to hear from you about a time that you made an unexpected connection through sewing. So if you have a story to share about that, it's really, really easy to do. All you have to do is go to seamwork.com/go/answer, and you can record an answer to that question about a time that you made an unexpected connection through sewing. Send it to us right through that website. So we'll also put a link in the show notes so you'll be able to find it really easily. The only thing we ask is that you please try to keep your answers to just a couple minutes long so that we can include them on the show.
Next up, we have some recommendations in addition to our question of the month every month. Sari and I are also going to be sharing some recommendations, just things that we find interesting, books, meetups, all sorts of different things we think that you'll be interested in too. This month, we have 2 new recommendations. What I wanted to share with you guys today is the Abolitionist Sewing Circle. It is brought to you by at @homegirlbox and @_Madison Star on Instagram. It's a weekly online sewing circle that centers around sewing, learning, dismantling, and re-envisioning. So each week there's a reading or some videos to watch, and then you all log on to the Zoom meeting, you sew together, you chat about it. I think it's a really positive way to participate in the conversation around anti-racism within our sphere of sewing. And I highly recommend it to anyone who's interested. So go check it out. You can join by heading to their Instagram account. So visit @homegirlbox or @_Madison Star. We'll include those handles in the show notes too. And follow the links in their profiles to check it out.
Oh, that sounds really awesome. So for me, the thing I want to recommend, since we've all been stuck at home a lot during this quarantine, one of the things that I've been really interested in lately, I mean, generally I am, but more so lately, is just reducing waste at home. In addition to that, just kind of thinking about our effect on the planet, and specifically with sewing, how my choices there have an environmental impact and what I can do about that and the fabric I use. So one thing I've been exploring is using food waste to dye fabric. That's something that I've been really, really interested in for a while, but I've started to experiment with it more now that I'm at home more. So I've been checking out this book that I'd like to recommend. It's called The Natural Colors Cookbook by Maggie Pate, and it's about dyeing fabric with food. So you can use all of those scraps in your kitchen, things that are left over that you don't have a use for, and use it actually to dye fabric in place of, harmful chemicals. I really love it because I think the colors you get from plant dyes are so beautiful and so interesting and organic. They kind of evolve along with your garment, which I think is really interesting. And I also just love the idea of using up all the stuff that might otherwise go in the compost or in the garbage. So that's something I've been playing with. I've been really loving using, especially avocado. That's my favorite. As Haley might remember, when we were in the office, I was collecting everybody's avocado skins and pits in the freezer. And I eat a lot of avocados myself. So it's really fun to play around with. So that book is called The Natural Colors Cookbook by Maggie Pate. So that's it for the first mini episode, you guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you've enjoyed it. Be sure to check out this month's issue of Seamwork, and you can check out our 2 new patterns, the Beckett overalls and the Samson top. You can find links to the issue and to the patterns in our show notes. And don't forget to tell us your stories. If you have a story to tell about how you forged an unlikely connection through sewing, we definitely want to hear from you. Again, you can just go to seamwork.com/go/answer to record your story right there on the web. Yeah, and that's it. We just want to say thank you to our amazing community of sewers and for contributing your stories and your creativity and your support. You guys are really what makes Seamwork so amazing and such a great community. So if you want to talk to your fellow Seamwork members, just go over to the community, the Seamwork community at seamwork.com, and you can find lots of cool people there, and we'll continue the conversation about sewing all month long. Thank you to everybody who contributed to Seamwork this month, and we'll see you soon. Bye.
Bye.
Seamwork Radio is brought to you by the Seamwork community, and you can find us at seamwork.com. If you have a story to share, send us an email at podcast@seamwork.com. We'd especially love to hear stories from those whose experiences often get left out of the conversation, whether because of race, gender identity, sexual orientation, disability, age, or any other reason. Again, that's podcast@seamwork.com. You can find us on Instagram at Seamwork and Seamwork Video on YouTube. We'd love to invite you to join us at seamwork.com. We have an amazing community there, as well as new sewing patterns and classes each month for members. Podcast listeners can get 50% off our unlimited membership, which gets you unlimited downloads from our library of over 150 wardrobe-building sewing patterns. Just visit seamwork.com/go/podcast50. You can also find that link in the show notes. And if you like this podcast, please consider giving us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or the podcast app of your choice. It really helps other people to find the show so they can hear these stories too. Thanks for joining us, and we'll be back with you soon. I'm Sari Mitnick, and this is Seamwork Radio.